Hey guys, tonight we step softly into the hush of a palace corridor where the lanterns are dim and the air feels heavier than the night outside. The Forbidden City, 600 years old, has been called a place of splendor, but also of shadows. Imagine walking through gates so tall they blot out the stars, past vermilion walls that seem to drink in silence like a sponge. Beneath golden tiles carved with dragons, whispers have lingered for centuries, rumors of cursed chambers, vanished concubines, and emperors who dared not enter certain rooms. It's the kind of silence that isn't empty but crowded, as if voices you cannot hear are still debating in the dark. And here's the twist. If you lean too far into that silence, you might not even survive it. Do you dare find out what the silence has been keeping? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you shared your location and the time where you are listening. Midnight in Toronto, early morning in Sydney, maybe a lazy afternoon in Buenos Aires. Together, we make a constellation of little lanterns across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Passing through the Meridian Gate, we step into a courtyard so vast it feels like an ocean of stone. In the Ming Dynasty, ministers lined up here in precise ranks, their dark robes rippling like waves whenever the wind passed. Eunuchs hurried across with scrolls, while the emperor emerged like the brightest star in a constellation. But shadows carried a different truth. People whispered that the gate's shadow at dusk stretched farther than natural, as though it wanted to pull the condemned inside. Maybe it was only the sun's angle boot when a place has witnessed punishment and sorrow. Even light and shadow begin to feel alive. The palace was built on cosmic order. Architects aligned gates with constellations, traced courtyards to mirror the heavens, and crowned rooftops with mythic animals thought to ward off danger. Vermilion symbolized life. Gold meant eternity. Every detail carefully tuned to harmony. Yet within this harmony grew unease. If a hall felt colder, candles sputtered too quickly, or someone died too suddenly, whispers turned that hall into a chamber of misfortune. What was meant to be perfect order became fertile ground for palace ghost stories, the imperial version of campfire tales, told by eunuchs in hushed voices instead of friends around a fire. Outside the walls, ordinary people never entered, but their imaginations did. To them, the Forbidden City was a sealed world, and sealed worlds always attract stories. In tier houses, storytellers painted the palace as alive, corridors bending toward places that couldn't be reached, rooms that punished those who lingered. Mothers warned children not to wander too near after dusk, or the silence of the palace itself would follow them home. And within the walls, servants lived with that tension daily. One creak at night, one flickering lantern, one door refusing to shoot each became an omen. Eunuchs carried these stories from chamber to chamber, while concubines used them to whisper warnings, real or imagined. Fear was contagious, and in the palace, fear itself could move faster than any edict. As we pause in this first courtyard together, can you feel it? The air is cooler here, as though the palace holds night more firmly than day. Perhaps it is only stone and shadow, or perhaps it is belief itself, lingering like incense smoke long after the flame has gone. Behind the stillness, something gentle is beginning to stir. A story long hidden is stretching awake, ready to lead us deeper. Because behind the carved dragons and painted phoenixes lies the first trace of what we will call the curse. The sense that not all footsteps in the Forbidden City belong to the living. Step deeper with me into the Forbidden City, and notice how not every chamber feels the same. The architects might have designed symmetry, rows of halls, balanced courtyards, golden roofs in perfect alignment, but human memory doesn't settle into symmetry. It clings to certain places, certain doors, certain whispers. And in this palace of 10,000 rooms, some of those whispers carried the chill of absence. There were chambers no one wanted to sleep in. One of the most repeated stories begins with an empress whose health declined without explanation. She was tended to by the most skilled physicians, surrounded by bowls of precious herbs and the cautious bows of attendants. Yet nothing helped. Night after night, her condition worsened, until she was said to have murmured of hearing footsteps circling her bed when no one stood nearby. Imagine lying there, lantern dim, silk curtains stirring without wind, the sound of slow pacing around you. Even in a palace of rituals and order, the thought alone would be enough to make the strongest heart uneasy. When she died, the emperor refused to spend another night in that chamber. The room was locked, its windows shuttered, the key kept out of sight. Servants whispered that candles sputtered in that hall, as if touched by unseen breath. And so the chamber joined the list of unlucky rooms whose silence seemed heavier, whose shadows stretched longer. Another tale tells of a concubine who vanished entirely. The records kept by officials are strangely quiet about her fate, which often means the silence itself was deliberate, but attendants whispered that she was last seen walking toward a narrow courtyard, her silk trailing across the stones. She never returned. No carriage carried her out, no scroll recorded her departure. Later, when servants were sent to sweep that courtyard at dusk, some claimed to glimpse a pale figure along the balustrade, moving like drifting fog. Whether or not anyone truly saw her, the rumor was enough. The courtyard became another, avoided space. Even emperors themselves were not free from unease. They were expected to embody the mandate of heaven, yet some admitted privately to their courtiers that certain halls felt unsettling. Official excuses were polite poor lighting, inconvenient drafts, but within the palace everyone knew the truth. These were the rooms where previous emperors had breathed their last too suddenly, or where decisions made seemed to coil into misfortune. To avoid them was not cowardice, but caution, a quiet recognition that even power might bend before silence. The eunuchs, who served as constant eyes and ears of the palace, spread such stories further. One told of hearing soft weeping near a sealed chamber, only to find it empty. Another described seeing a lantern swing when no breeze stirred. Such tales weren't proclaimed loudly, they were passed like contraband in whispers, in the hours when sleep was thin and the palace itself seemed most alive. Imagine standing at midnight near the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the grandest court of all. Its courtyard is vast, the paving stones glowing faintly under the moon, yet some claim to see shadows moving against the pillars when no torch was lit. The mind tries to explain perhaps fatigue, perhaps tricks of the eye, but when enough people glimpse the same impossible shape, the rumor itself becomes reality. The Forbidden City was not only a palace, it became a living archive of the uncanny. And beyond the red walls, these stories multiplied. Mothers warned their children, "Do not wander near the palace at night, or the silence inside will notice you." Storytellers in the markets embroidered tales of cursed chambers, halls where even emperors dared not sleep, courtyards where vanished figures walked forever. For the city outside, the Forbidden City became not just a seat of power but a shadowed heart, where curses might walk beside rulers. For those who lived within, this reputation shaped daily life. Servants carried both privilege and fear, the privilege of serving at the empire's core, and the fear that illness or disappearance could come without cause. To clean a locked chamber was to enter with trembling hands, never sure if the candle would hold steady. To pass by an avoided courtyard at dusk was to glance quickly away, pretending not to see. Life inside was never only politics and ritual, it was also the weight of unspoken dread. And as you and I pause in this stretch of the journey, the palace presses more firmly upon us. Perhaps it is only imagination, but it feels as though behind one of these shuttered doors, the air weights heavier than in others, reluctant to be disturbed. You do not need to open the door to sense it, you only need to stand still and listen until the hush itself begins to resemble a voice. Yet behind that hush, another layer is waiting to be revealed. For whispers here were not only about shadows, they became tools of rivalry, carried by human hands and spoken by human mouths. In the next part of our journey, we'll find how curses were not only feared, but sometimes used, shaping the delicate balance of power inside the inner court. The Forbidden City was built to house 10,000 lives at its height: emperors, empresses, concubines, eunuchs, attendants, cooks, guards. With so many people moving daily across courtyards and chambers, you might expect that every disappearance could be explained, yet within these vermilion walls, some lives slipped quietly away, leaving no scroll, no record, only whispers. One of the oldest tales concerns a young concubine whose beauty had caught the emperor's eye for a season. She lived in a modest hall near the inner court, and attendants remembered her laughter as bright as the lanterns in spring. Then one night, she was gone. No carriage carried her out, no decree mentioned her. The court records fall silent, as if her name had never been written. But the servants whispered that she had been seen walking toward a narrow courtyard, her robe trailing like mist over the flagstones. She never returned. Later, when dusk fell on that same courtyard, some swore they saw her figure glide along the balustrade, silk moving like fog against the stone. Whether real or imagined, the story was enough to mark that courtyard as unlucky. She was not the only one. Eunuchs, too, were said to have vanished. These men had no families outside, no lineage to protect their memory, and so their absence was easier to erase. One story tells of a eunuch sent to deliver a message late at night. He passed beneath the shadow of a gate and was never seen again. By dawn, another eunuch carried the message, as if nothing had happened. But in the quiet hours, others whispered of hearing faint footsteps where he disappeared, as though his task continued even without his body. Disappearances grew into patterns, and patterns grew into reputation. Courtyards became avoided, chambers sealed, passageways whispered about. Even emperors came to respect these reputations. A ruler might walk proudly before his court, but when choosing where to sleep, he would pause at certain thresholds, weighing not only comfort, but what history had whispered about that room. The most powerful man in the empire could not escape the suggestion that certain doors concealed more than wood and silence, and the whispers travelled outward. In the city beyond, storytellers embroidered the tales, turning vanished lives into legends. They spoke of courtyards where silk still drifted without wind, of halls where shadows lengthened unnaturally, of chambers that resisted light. These were not just ghost stories. They were reflections of unease about power itself. If concubines and eunuchs could vanish in the palace, what might vanish in the empire at large? Inside, those left behind carried the weight of these tales. Imagine being an attendant told to sweep a chamber where someone had disappeared. Every brush of the broom against the floor would feel like stirring the air of memory. Imagine carrying a tray of food into a hall where a mistress had once lived, but whose name no longer appeared in the records. The silence itself became heavy, as though it resisted intrusion. And yet, disappearances also served purposes. A rival might benefit from the sudden absence of a competitor. An official might find it convenient that a eunuch who knew too much had vanished. In this way, the uncanny and the political intertwined. A disappearance could be whispered about as a curse, but it could also be a decision disguised as fate. You and I stand now at one such deserted courtyard, the moonlight sliding across glazed tiles. The windows are clouded, the doors closed. The silence feels thick, like paper pressed between stones. Perhaps nothing ever happened here, perhaps the tales are embroidered layers on simple forgetfulness. But perhaps silence itself has weight, and that weight can erase names as surely as ink. Look closely. The palace seems to lean inward, as if listening. The vanished are not recorded, but their absence becomes louder than presence. And when absence itself gains voice, it shapes not only fear, but behavior. Ministers avoided certain wings, concubines whispered of cursed spaces, eunuchs warned one another in half-smiles and lowered tones. Thus, the vanished continued to walk, not in body but in influence, and influence was the true power of such tales. For soon, whispers of vanished concubines and silent courtyards became more than folklore. They became weapons used carefully by those who wished to tilt favor, steer choices, or secure their own survival. In the next part of our journey, we'll see how rumors of curses were not only feared but wielded, turning silence itself into a tool of power. Inside the forbidden city, whispers were more than idle talk. In a palace where every gesture was watched and every decision rippled outward, words carried weight, especially when they were about things no one could prove yet everyone feared. To say a chamber was unlucky, or that a certain courtyard carried restless air, was to plant a seed, and in the fertile soil of rivalry and ambition, those seeds could grow into entire forests of advantage. Concubines were among the first to wield this power. Imagine two women vying for the emperor's attention. To suggest that her rival's chamber felt strange was to raise suspicion without accusation. If the emperor hesitated to visit that hall, if attendants whispered about candles sputtering inside, then the rival found herself quietly isolated. No poison, no overt schemery, a rumor, carried on silken incense, reshaping the emperor's footsteps. In this way, a whispered curse could do what no decree ever could. The empress herself, highest among the women, walked a careful line. To dismiss superstition entirely risked appearing careless. To embrace it too openly risked appearing weak. So she let the whispers circle, never landing on her directly, but guiding her decisions. If the emperor paused before an avoided hall, she might gently suggest another more auspicious place. Her calm voice carried authority, but beneath it lay an understanding. Even shadows could serve as allies. Eunuchs, bound wholly to palace service, became the main carriers of these whispers. Their lives were entwined with corridors and courtyards, their ears sharpened to every sigh and every rumor. A single phrase spoken by one eunuch in the quiet hours could drift like smoke by dawn. By midday, it was truth. And with truth came power. To be known as someone who could sense when a chamber was restless or when incense burned strangely was to hold invisible authority, at times stronger than official rank. Think of a minister arriving to meet the emperor. If the audience was scheduled in a hall whispered to be ill-omened, the atmosphere changed before words were even spoken. His voice might falter, his convictions soften, his arguments lose force. The emperor, watching calmly, benefited from an unseen ally. The weight of rumor. Politics became theatre, and whispers provided the stage lights that no one could see but everyone felt. Some emperors recognized this and used it deliberately. To humble an ambitious minister, a ruler might summon him to an avoided chamber. Surrounded by carved beams and heavy silence, the minister bowed lower, spoke more cautiously, his ambition subdued by unease. The emperor, seated calmly in the very place others feared, appeared greater by contrast. Thus, superstition became a throne accessory, a quiet instrument of rule. But whispers were double-edged. They could also entrap emperors themselves. Some grew captive to the very shadows they feared, shifting residences constantly, unable to sleep in one place for more than a few nights. The palace, vast though it was, became a labyrinth of avoidance. Officials grew restless at the lack of stability, while servants whispered louder, filling every silence with speculation. In those reigns, rumor governed as much as decree. For those seeking survival in the inner court, whispers offered opportunity. A consort could tilt the balance of affection, a eunuch could secure favor, a minister could strengthen his advice by citing omens. The lines blurred. Was the curse real, or was it simply spoken into existence? In the Forbidden City, reality often bent beneath the weight of belief. You and I pause now in a dim corridor, the walls painted with phoenixes that seem to watch with half-closed eyes. Imagine a servant leaning close to you, voice low. That hall is not safe. Better not to linger. You feel the chill even before you know why. And that is the essence of whispers in this palace are not proof. Not evidence, but presence. A suggestion strong enough to shape behavior. In this way, silence became not just fear, but currency. To control it was to control choice, and to control choice was to control destiny. And yet, as powerful as these whispers were, they could not fully shield rulers from the deepest unease, because beyond the game of rumor and advantage, the palace itself still pressed its presence. Even emperors at the height of glory felt its weight. In the next part of our journey, we'll see how rulers, surrounded by splendor, still sensed unease in the very halls built to celebrate their power. Step with me now beyond the inner court, and into the vast state halls where emperors once received their ministers. These were places of reasoner, so the records claim. Here, decrees were drafted, policies debated, wars declared. The air was supposed to carry clarity, not whispers, and yet, even in these grandest halls, the weight of superstition pressed its presence, bending politics as surely as any law. Imagine an emperor preparing to hold council in a chamber where a predecessor had died suddenly. On the surface, he explained his choice carefully: poor light, inconvenient design, drafty corners. But everyone listening knew the deeper truth. The hall had been marked. To sit upon its throne was to invite misfortune. Ministers stepped across the threshold with lowered eyes, as if the floor itself remembered what had happened there. Their voices dropped, their words softened. Even before the council began, the room itself had shaped the outcome. For ambitious officials, the palace's reputation became both obstacle and opportunity. A clever minister might remind the emperor of past omens, framing his advice in terms of caution. "Remember what befell your ancestor in this chamber," he might whisper, tilting the balance of decision. His logic gained strength, not just from reason, but from the invisible weight of tradition. In this way, politics merged with belief, and belief gave arguments sharper edges. Eunuchs, always at the emperor's side, amplified these effects. Their loyalty was complicated, but their influence undeniable. A single phrase, perhaps another hall would be more auspicious today, was often enough to redirect the path of empire. Councils shifted locations, decrees were signed under different beams, armies waited while rooms were debated, and history itself bent, not always by force of will, but by the suggestion of unseen currents. Some emperors harnessed this dynamic deliberately. A ruler who wished to soften opposition might call a meeting in a hall whispered to be unlucky. Surrounded by shadowed beams, officials entered with unease, their ambition dulled, their arguments cautious, their bows deeper than usual. The emperor, seated calmly amid the dread, seemed untouchable. By using fear as a backdrop, he magnified his own authority. Politics became theatre, and the stage was set by whispers. But not all rulers mastered this performance. Some became prisoners of it. Records hint at emperors who could not rest in one chamber, who shifted their counsels endlessly, unable to settle. The palace shrank around them, not as stone but as limitation. Officials grew impatient, the machinery of state slowed, and outside the walls, people whispered, "If the emperor cannot govern his palace, how can he govern the empire?" Thus, superstition that once served as a tool turned into a snare. Consider the Hall of Mental Cultivation, where Qing emperors later resided. Its name promised serenity, yet shadows inside lengthened in ways that unsettled attendants. Some swore they heard faint murmurs in the night when the emperor worked alone. Ministers summoned there walked beneath beams heavy with rumor, their hearts beating faster, their petitions softened. The hall itself seemed to whisper of exhaustion and burden, turning governance into a struggle not only of politics but of atmosphere. Outside the vermilion walls, ordinary people absorbed these tales and found meaning in them. If the Son of Heaven hesitated before a door, perhaps heaven's mandate itself was trembling. If an emperor avoided a hall, perhaps the empire should beware. The curse of a single chamber became the curse of the dynasty in the imagination of the city. Gossip in tier houses carried these stories outward, weaving political unease into the fabric of daily life. And so the Forbidden City, designed as a symbol of perfect order, became instead a labyrinth, where politics and superstition tangled together. The placement of a council, the choice of a chamber, even the path of a procession each carried weight not only because of ritual, but because of rumor. In this way, silence shaped policy, shadows bent decisions, and whispers wrote themselves into history. Pause with me here. We stand at the threshold of one such hall, its doors closed, its paint faded. Ministers once stepped through, their minds sharpened by ambition, their voices ready to persuade. But the moment they crossed into the gloom, the memory of past deaths, the rumor of curses, weighed upon them. Their arguments faltered, their confidence dimmed, and the emperor, seated at the far end, watched the atmosphere bend to his will to the palace's will. It is here, in the hush of governance, that we see how fragile power could be. For even at its height, the empire bent not only to laws and armies, but to the unseen breath of the palace at night. And yet, as we leave this hall behind, something gentle stirs again. In the next part of our journey, we'll step into the grandest spaces, where emperors at the very height of their glory still felt unease, as though shadows coiled close, even in the brightest halls. At the height of their reigns, emperors of China were meant to embody certainty. The mandate of heaven was said to flow through them. Their presence alone was supposed to steady the empire. In portraits, they sit beneath golden beams, robes heavy with dragons, eyes steady as mountains. Yet even those who commanded armies and reshaped cities carried a quieter weight inside the Forbidden City. For amid all the grandeur, the palace still whispered. Picture the Qianlong Emperor, one of the most celebrated rulers of the Qing dynasty. His reign stretched decades, filling the Forbidden City with art, poetry, treasures from distant lands. He wrote verses about landscapes, commissioned scrolls of beauty, collected jade and porcelain. Outwardly, his court was a golden age. And yet, behind that glow, certain rooms of his palace remained untouched. Their doors stayed closed, their silence deeper than others. Visitors whispered, why would a ruler so confident in his mandate leave chambers sealed? Perhaps it was only personal choice, or perhaps even in prosperity. He felt the hush pressing against him. Grandeur amplified unease rather than erasing it. The higher the emperor rose, the more sensitive he became to omens. A flicker in a lantern during a midnight council could weigh on his thoughts. A draught that extinguished candles might seem more than mere air. Even the creak of timber in a great hall could feel like a voice. When you carry the empire upon your shoulders, even small disturbances echo louder. To guard against such feelings, emperors turned to ritual. Taoist priests traced talismans across parchment. Buddhist monks filled chambers with chants. Incense curled upward like threads meant to weave protection. Amulets were tucked into robes, prayers recited quietly before audiences. Official chronicles rarely mention these practices, but side notes and anecdotes tell the story. Behind the scenes of power, emperors sought shelter not only from enemies beyond the walls but from shadows within them. And still, rituals provided only partial comfort. Imagine the emperor standing alone at night in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the dragon throne gleaming faintly beneath moonlight. By day it was the stage of authority, where thousands bowed. By night, it was vast, hollow, the sound of his own breathing too loud, the creak of timber too sharp. What glorified him in daylight turned uneasy after dark. The same architecture that symbolized command also magnified solitude. Even attendants noticed. Eunuchs learned to read the emperor's expression carefully. If his gaze flicked toward a certain hall with hesitation, they quietly redirected his steps. Ministers adjusted their petitions depending on the mood of the court. Thus, the palace's atmosphere, the hush of certain corridors, the heaviness of certain rooms guided not only the ruler, but the machinery of empire itself. Outside, people still imagined their emperor as untouchable. Portraits showed serenity, decrees spoke with clarity, yet rumors slipped beyond the red walls. Stories of rulers who refused to sleep in certain halls, who called priests to chant over their chambers, who feared the hush as much as they commanded armies. These stories softened the divine image, reminding people that even the Son of Heaven was human, vulnerable to unease. You and I pause now in a moonlit hall. Its beams stretch like silver threads across the floor, the dragon throne at the far end silent and commanding. From this seat, emperors once reshaped millions of lives. Yet picture one of them alone here at midnight, robes heavy, eyes alert to every sound. Even at the pinnacle of glory, shadows coiled close. Power and fragility walked side by side, as inseparable as light and darkness. And still, behind the splendor, another shift was waiting. For the whispers that haunted emperors in times of triumph would grow louder when dynasties faltered. As the empire weakened, curses became explanations for every failure, every loss. In the next stage of our journey, we'll see how decline and darkening tales fed one another, until the Forbidden City itself seemed to breathe endings before they arrived. As centuries passed, the Forbidden City endured not only triumph, but decline. The vermilion paint that once gleamed with authority began to peel. The golden tiles, once radiant, weathered beneath storms. Footsteps that had once carried confidence softened into shuffling echoes. When dynasties faltered, when famine pressed on the land or enemies advanced from beyond the borders, the palace seemed to absorb the weight of failure. And with failure came whispers louder than before. An empire in decline is like a mirror. Every crack in its surface reflects something larger than itself. When emperors grew sickly, when court decisions faltered, when corruption spread like ivy across the bureaucracy, the people looked toward the palace and asked why. Explanations were sought not only in politics but in the unseen. They said the mandate of heaven had weakened. They said the palace itself, with its sealed halls and unlit chambers, had turned against its masters. In markets and tea-houses, storytellers embroidered the decline into legend. They spoke of rulers who dared to sleep in forbidden chambers and never woke again. They told of phantom processions at midnight, pale courtiers walking in silence across deserted courtyards, carrying scrolls that no longer had readers. Such tales grew with each retelling, giving shape to anxieties too vast to name. The curse of the palace became the curse of the empire. Inside the walls, fear deepened. Servants refused night duty in certain wings, claiming their lamps guttered too quickly, or that their shadows stretched unnaturally. Eunuchs murmured that unlucky halls spread misfortune not only to rulers but to those who served them. In a palace already heavy with intrigue, the weight of unseen fear made isolation worse. Emperors withdrew, ministers bickered, alliances frayed, decline became self-fulfilling, as though the palace itself leaned toward collapse. Consider the final years of the Ming dynasty. Rebellion surged across the land, and foreign armies pressed at the borders. Within the Forbidden City, the Chongzhen emperor fought against despair. Records suggest he shifted restlessly from chamber to chamber, unable to settle. Perhaps it was the burden of rebellion. Perhaps it was the feeling that no room could shelter him from fate. When the dynasty fell, the palace seemed to shudder with him. For those who later walked its halls, the story was clear. The palace had consumed its emperor, just as rumor had long foretold. By the Qing dynasty's later years, decline took on a different shape. Foreign powers knocked at the gates, demanding treaties, forcing concessions. The empire strained under modern challenges it could not avoid. Inside the Forbidden City, emperors turned more and more to ritual protections. Amulets multiplied. Certain halls were sealed, their doors locked permanently. Rooms once vibrant with ceremony stood empty. Ministers debated reforms while the palace itself seemed frozen in ritual silence. Outside, the people read hesitation as proof. The rulers were haunted not only by politics but by the walls around them. For ordinary citizens, curses explained what decrees could not. When taxes rose, when soldiers lost battles, when famine struck, the idea that even the emperor was shadowed by unlucky rooms gave shape to their suffering. If the Son of Heaven could not command silence, how could he command fortune? The palace's sealed doors and whispering halls became symbols of an empire unable to face daylight. Even today, you can feel it. Walk the stone avenues and notice the difference between corners. In some courtyards, the paint peels more easily, the timber creaks more sharply. Perhaps it is only age, but perhaps it is also the echo of centuries when the empire's struggles were mirrored in these chambers. To imagine an unlucky room is to imagine an unlucky reign, and once imagined, the two became inseparable. Travelers to Beijing described the Forbidden City as both awe-inspiring and ominous. At night, they said, the walls seemed too tall, the silence too thick. Local people sometimes glanced upward at the palace and imagined lights flickering where no lanterns burned. Even after emperors fell, the aura of unease clung to the vermilion walls, as if decline itself had left fingerprints upon the stone. And so, decline and superstition wrapped around each other like ivy and wall, each feeding the other's growth. An empire weakened, the palace seemed cursed. The palace seemed cursed, the empire weakened further. In this cycle, the Forbidden City became not only the stage of history but a participant, whispering of endings even before they arrived. But endings are not endings in a palace like this. They are transformations, for the whispers did not die with dynasties. They carried forward, shaping how later generations saw the palace. In the final part of our journey, we will walk through its legacy not only as stone and timber, but as memory and legend, a place where stories of curses still linger in the air. Centuries have passed, dynasties have risen and fallen, yet the Forbidden City still breathes. The empire is gone, but the palace remains, and with it remain the whispers. You and I walk now not as courtiers or emperors, but as visitors carried by history's hush. Lanterns glow faintly along vermilion walls, their circles of light trembling as if stirred by unseen breath. Every corner seems to hold memory. When the last emperor, a boy too young to carry centuries, left the palace in the early 20th century, the gates opened to the public. People rushed in not only to marvel at jade and silk, but to seek the sealed rooms. Which doors had emperors refused to cross? Which halls carried the rumors of restless footsteps? It was as if silence itself had become a treasure. Visitors often describe strange sensations. Some speak of chills even on warm days. Others notice their footsteps echo differently in certain wings, the sound heavier, as though the air itself pressed down. Guides smile and tell the history, but when asked about specific halls, their eyes sometimes flicker with caution. Even in the age of electric light, the Forbidden City maintains corners that seem dimmer than they should be. Writers and filmmakers embraced the aura. They imagined ghostly emperors pacing after midnight, concubines drifting in moonlit courtyards, eunuchs whispering secrets to stone walls. These stories, whether fact or invention, carried forward the idea that the palace itself was alive. Artists painted it not only as a monument, but as a labyrinth of memory, where beauty and unease coexisted. In this way, the supposed curses became symbols of the fragility of power, the burden of history, and the mystery that lingers when lives end but places endure. For ordinary people, the palace became a mirror. A ruler could command armies, but could he command silence? A dynasty could build walls, but could it escape whispers? The Forbidden City's legacy is to remind us that power is never absolute. Even the most exalted figures bowed to something unseen. Today, tourists walk the same stones where eunuchs once hurried. They take photographs where concubines once whispered. And yet, as the sun lowers and shadows lengthen, even modern visitors sometimes fall quiet. A rustle in the eaves, a hush of birds, the faint impression of eyes from darkened windows. Such moments remind us that time alone does not erase mystery. The palace has become a museum, but it resists being only that. Each hall is both artifact and presence. Guides can explain symmetry, dragons, rituals, yet no explanation fully dispels the sense that certain spaces hold more than wood and stone. The curses are no longer accusations, they are heritage. They are not to be proven or disproven, but to be felt. And so the Forbidden City carries a double legacy. It is a monument to imperial China and a vessel for the intangible. Fear, awe, memory, wonder. The same walls that sheltered emperors now shelter imagination. The same chambers once avoided are now sought out by those eager to sense history's chill. In this way, the whispers have not faded. They have transformed, woven into culture. Step with me into the final courtyard. Lantern light glows softly against stone worn smooth by centuries. The empire has fallen, yet the silence persists, carrying stories that will not fade. Perhaps the true curse of the Forbidden City is not death or disappearance, but remembrance, the impossibility of leaving behind what happened here. The palace insists on memory, on retelling, on lingering, long after footsteps have gone. And even now, as we prepare to leave its gates, something stirs one last time. Not fear, but wonder. For every stone carries breath, every silence carries voice, every shadow carries story. 600 years old, the Forbidden City still walks beside us in the dark. The night has deepened, and the palace around us is hushed as though it, too, has fallen asleep. Lanterns flicker softly in the distance, their glow no longer mysterious but comforting, like gentle candles left to guide us home. The vermilion walls that seemed so imposing now feel like companions, their silence less heavy, more like a blanket settling across the shoulders. Take a slow breath with me. Inhale the coolness of the night air. Exhale the weight of centuries we've carried on this walk. The shadows no longer press. They simply rest. The palace, once a labyrinth of whispers, now feels like a story folded carefully into memory. Its curses, its vanished lives, its lingering silence, all of it belongs to history, not to us. And that distance makes it safe. You might imagine the last echo of footsteps fading beyond the gates, or the hush of drums that once marked the hours softening into nothing. What remains is calm. What remains is the steady rhythm of your own breathing, the warmth of your own space, the knowledge that the night is yours. The Forbidden City will still be here tomorrow, holding its silence, its secrets, its stories. You don't need to solve them tonight. Tonight, you need only let them drift away, like incense smoke dispersing into the air. So rest now. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the stillness of the palace guide you towards stillness within yourself. History can wait. Sleep is here.